My paper will be on literature and onomastics on the holy names used by Dante in his masterpiece entitled The Divine Comedy. Dante invokes in my case, invokes two female figures, his beloved, who in the real life was dead as a young woman and who became his muse. It is Beatrice or Beatrice, and his second addressee in my case is the Holy Virgin. And I will speak about the type of antonomasia rooted in a prayer called litany. Then I will link my discourse with J.L. Austin's theory of speech acts. Shortly about Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. It's an epic poem that tells the journey into the underworld of Dante as a fictitious person. It is located in time between the Good Friday and the Easter of the year 1300. And the book, the poem by Dante is divided in three parts. Virgil, the poet, ancient poet, guides Dante through Inferno, or the hell, and Purgatorio, or the purgatory, and at the end of which Beatrice, Dante's first love, appears to lead him through both earthly and heavenly paradise, the Paradiso. The poem have been written during the first and the second decade of the 14th century, and Dante, a real person, died in 1321. For the present paper, it is important to underline a deep relation of Dante's poetics with the young tradition of the vernacular poetry, which at that time was less than 100 years old. I mean the poetry in Italian vernaculars, of course. What do I mean? There was a new 13th century genre of praising song called lauda or lauds, written in Italian vernaculars in an epoch that precedes Dante. Those religious and poetic songs developed a strong mechanism of invocation to the celestial addressees, to Jesus, the Holy Virgin, Saint Francis of Assisi, for example, or Anthony of Padua, or others, who, from my point of view, are I see them in this moment as holy names. Those songs called lauda, laude, or lauds were an early prayers in vernaculars, while in the liturgy at that time, and generally speaking, also all the Church of Rome was speaking Latin. Of course, both the structures and the vocabulary of these songs were related to the official language of Christianity. Nevertheless, the mode is free. The mode was free and poetic, and so the stylistic choices. If the prayer, generally speaking, is a performative in linguistics, parts of these 13th century poems take up this feature, and this model of invocation, inspired by invocations in vernacular Italian, inspired by Latin prayers and liturgy, could be spread in the 13th century. Dante's work and Dante's masterpiece, in this case, absorbed this model very well. The second point of my paper is the encounter between poetry and speech acts. As it is acknowledged, John Langshaw Austin was skeptical about the possibility of finding them in poetry, about the capacity of the poetry to expressing the speech acts. This is not the opinion of some scholars, some recent scholars in the recent works, and I think about Maximilian de Gaynesford and Adam Kalbarczyk from Poland. Austin individuated certain issues that impede the encounter between poetry and the theory of speech acts, such as the things that we do as agents, or the ordinary physical and bodily actions difficult to be achieved in the lyric. In how to do with things with words, Austin leaves a possibility. When he speaks about the special nature of acts of saying something. And following this reasonment, the Gaynesford spoke about poetic, the Gaynesford who work on poetry specifically. He says that poetic uttering can be regarded as a species of the latter group. It is difficult to find studies on the influence of the performatives belonging to the communication of our everyday life on poetic utterances. And this will be one of the points of my today's paper. The third point is the litany, as it is recited in the Catholic Church starting from the Middle Ages. The litany is well rooted in European and Western culture and in our memory of the oral formulas. On the one side, anyone can understand cliché phrases as it's a litany of complaints. It is rooted also at a semantic level. On the other, when we hear an oral recitation containing a list intersected cyclically by a formula, even when we cannot either hear or understand well, we associate such recitation with the litany. This is a kind of auditory memory for me. Historically, we have two branches of the litanic tradition. The first and elder concerns the litany of the saints. The other, the litany of Loreto, addressed to the Holy Virgin. What we see at the left side, you can see here two really small, short fragments of the two main types of the litany. And each of them is divided in two parts. What we see at the left side is the so-called litanic antonomasia. It is Sancta Maria, Sancte Petra et Paule, Sancte Andrea, Mater Christi, Rosa Mystica, Turris Davidica. This litanic antonomasia is a way to invoke and win the attention of both the saints and the Virgin, who are our intercessors with God. This antonomasia is very simple in the case of the saints. It includes simply the title and the name, Sancta Maria, Sancta Andrea, but it is richly developed in the case of the Holy Virgin and in other litanies written successively, for instance, in the 17th century litany of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. In the latter two examples, the litany of Loreto and the litany of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, I cannot quote here, an original descriptive element becomes the name that is called. If the prayer are performatives, the invocation on the left is an integral part of it, not only the syntactic completion of the verbal phrase ora pro nobis, which in a prayer doesn't work alone. In certain dialogues of the Divine Comedy, the statements concerning Beatrice and the Holy Virgin are of two types, as canonically in the pragmatic theory. I notice, where we have those in which the enunciator, Dante, describes when he speaks about either his life or about history, theology, when he reports events to the souls of the dead friends, and so on. And then we have the second type, or the interactions of the Holy Virgin with Saint Lucy of Syracuse, and of a letter with Beatrice, who then meets Virgil, and Virgil addresses and is addressed by Dante. When those figures speak one to another, they call, invoke one another, and they let do, command, they word, they give rise to actions that are immediately executed. their conversation present as standard structures. It is always the same structure, invocation plus order. Of course, the pragmatic value of these statements can be analyzed as the literary simulation, but from my point of view, they are performatives, at least partially, for another reason I will explain soon. In the second canto of the Inferno, we have moments of encounters and dialogues directed or reported. I quote in Italian because the translation itself presents a problem, which could be more difficult to explain the idea. My work is on the Italian text. Each time there is in this conversation, each time there is both addresser and receiver. In each time, both of them confirm and the reception of the speech act, recognizing the sender as a valid subject who may utter an order. The receiver communicates his prediction on himself. He will execute the request. I could follow this way, adding that in the case of a conversation as those examined in the classical studies in pragmatics, also the motivations are recognized as valid. The fictitious Dante explicates this part on the communication in the lines 80 to 84 of the second canto, when Virgil asks what brings Beatrice to the limbo. I will tell you the situation so we all can manage the problem of the Italian quotation, I hope. Beatrice motivates her travel from the heavens, so a typically pragmatic opening of a conversation is transformed into a meta-dialogue in which the implied parts of any efficient verbal interaction are explained and revealed. In a broader sense, one could speak about a rhetorical operation of captatio benevolentiae for these invocations. But my attention is always on another thing, on the value of this onomastic call. This onomastic call, the litanic antonomasia, as I explained before, which is a circumlocution that designates the interlocutor through a substantive and epithet, and it is always praising. In the examined fragments, it is always used to call someone as an invocation. It works in the same way for the conversation between Lucy, Saint Lucy of Syracuse, and Beatrice in the same canto. And this conversation is reported to Virgil by Beatrice. A litanic antonomasia opens the discourse. Beatrice lode di Dio vera. All these fragments refer particularly to a tradition which reminds the invocation to the sacred addressees in the spiritual praising songs in Italian vernacular. In this, the lauds take directly from the litanies. The point is that in Dante's masterpiece, all these moments bring movement because they enable the receivers to act. These interactions are also very hierarchical. The Virgin speaks with Saint Lucy, who goes to Beatrice and speaks with Beatrice, and she descends from the heaven and meets Virgil, who will report all this vertical communication to Dante, who have just lost his way. And all the Divine Comedy, we can say, starts because of a series of particular performatives, which are halfway, for me, literary and halfway actually pragmatic. And I'm going to explain. Well, we have here also a fragment of Purgatory, and then a fragment of the last canto of the Paradiso. In the first fragment on the left, it seems a request for information, while the language is the most important factor of action. It brings movement as Beatrice turns to another woman, Matilda, so Dante can get an answer. Once again, we observe that the first quarter line in which Dante calls Beatrice using a litanic antonomastic element, as it was developed in the 13th century laws, rooted in the litany, as I said. I think I have no time to analyze the third example, the last example on the right. I'd rather go to the debate. Here in Italy, there is Marina Sbisa, who argues that the procedure to realize a speech act often is purely linguistic, especially when we affirm, make a request, or give advices. In these cases, no extra linguistic behavior is necessary. As we know, it is not simple to reconcile the speech acts theory and the study of the poetry. A proposal of textual pragmatic was recently made by Maximilian de Gaynesford, who worked in poetry. The analysis I present allows me to partially follow his reasoning, especially the points concerning the relevance of the values of truth or action achieved by the speech act. The latter is much more relevant, I mean the action. Also in my study, as one could expect, reading Gaynesford, in the context of the analyzed parts of Dante's poem, I propose some of the utterances in which the subject lets someone else do something, using first a litanic antonomasia, invoking he or she moves the object in another area of the afterworld. It is an interlocking mechanism, as the object becomes a subject that each time the object becomes the subject who lets someone else act in a new area of the afterlife. So it is the Holy Virgin who moves from her throne in heaven, who goes to Beatrice, place in paradise, and uses a litanic antonomasia to call her and tell her to save Dante, to rescue Dante. So Beatrice goes where Saint Lucy of Syracuse stays in paradise and calls her using a litanic antonomasia, followed by a request. Lucy descends in the limbo and addresses Virgil, who will actually rescue Dante on his way. In these statements, if these statements are necessarily true, considered both the possibility of a simulated acts, literary act, and that of the commitment of the language itself, and this is the solution of the Gaynesford, the theoretical solution of the Gaynesford, that makes less relevant the dichotomy true-false. The Gaynesford, I said, noted that the principal value of this statement is their capacity to create action and a related universe. And you can see the related quotation. Action, rather than the truth, is made basic to poetic actions. The material we examine in our paper, I examine my paper, is specifically referred to context of conversation intersected with prayer-like callings. It is different from the prayer for which the process of communication that we control goes in one direction only. In our case, at least in both hell and purgatory, the moments of meeting between Dante and Beatrice, or between Beatrice and other celestial beings, manifest features of speech acts. These moments open with an antonomastic invocation and then present a request. The latter element is, of course, relevant, but the former, the calling of the holy names, links the simulated universe of the Divine Comedy with the real world of the actual performatives. It is the memory of the oral recitation, in Dante's case, probably also mediated through the religious poetry, which openly quoted litanic prayers. And we should remember that those spiritual songs, the lauds, were sung in the 13th and 14th centuries and even later. From my point of view, there is an auditory memory, and the author may be aware or not of it. And it is the factor that unites simulated poetic conversation and the work of real and true performatives. This auditory memory brings the calling of holiness in Dante's masterpiece towards the actual pragmatic. This factor partially moves the examined fragments to an area halfway between literature and life. At the same time, in the penultimate canto of the Paradiso, Dante addresses a prayer to, in the last canto of the Paradiso, Dante addresses a prayer to the Holy Virgin. And it is a more traditional way of communicate. We newly find here the invocation, which at this point can be considered as a kind of indicator of performativity, poetic performativity. The pragmatic force of the antonomastic invocation is active because of the link with the litany and the memory of the oral recitation of litany. In a literary text which simulates the dialogues and also uses the simulated speech acts, the calling of the holy names is a borderline component that belongs to a performative. Dante's epic poem contains interesting fragments in which the dialogues, which could be considered as a mere simulation, present moments of tension between poetry and reality. And I hope that my analysis will help to understand that the poetry is not only a simulated language, it is built up of pieces of auditory memory, and this brings the poetry towards the actual world in which the speech acts actually works. Well, of course, okay. We may also ask what is the practical effect of using invocation in this context, in the context of this masterpiece. Dante represents Beatrice as a sign to put her in paradise. He constructs for her a language of holiness. In the Divine Comedy, the woman has the same status of the most important Christian figures. This thesis is not very original. The point that is less obvious is that this is achieved thanks to a very specific speech act. I interpret our invocation as performatives according to the idea of auditory memory that acts here. All this concurs to the complex effect of holiness referred to Beatrice. This point might be an interesting contribute to the study of Dante's great work. J.L. Austin leaves the possibility of creating new conventions through the speech acts. This would be a little bit more complex of what he imagined, but as the canonization in the Catholic Church is also a performative, Dante creates a very particular performative to canonize his beloved. And thank you.
I have a question. I was wondering whether you have used this approach, I mean, a speech act theory, analyzing other works from the same period, or?
Actually, I presented analysis of more link with rhetorics. All the work originates from a study of the litany in literature. So, and this was since now it was a simply work on literature, and this passage is new.
We have a question here. Does Dante from Dennis Nosen, does Dante's Paradiso versus Inferno have deeper or more frequent use of litany performative positioning between literature and life?
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's not simple to find an answer, but I found more expression of this kind. It is not simple to explain what I mean in this particular research. I found in the Divine Comedy, I found more expression of this kind, and we find them in other conversation, in other figures, other characters use this kind of expression. Still, I
Maybe
have
less
no
frequent in
statistics.
paradise.
No, no statistics. So one day, perhaps, I will be able to answer this question.
Maybe comparing the three of them, both
Yes.
Inferno.
Yes, perhaps. Yes. One would say that the paradise is perhaps, but also the purgatory is really quite full. It's a big word. It's rich.
So we also have a reflection, a thought from Emilia Di Martino, though Austin expels literature from the domain of speech acts as a parasistic isolation of language. Derrida's concept of iterability, i.e. the possibility of repeating a text, which means that the speaker's intentions are never fully present in a speech act, combined with his stress on the distinctiveness of every individual speech act, actually turn all speech acts into some form of literature.
Yes, in fact, yes, that's all. Yes, of course. My work in this case was to identify this kind of itinerant real actual speech act in the literature, and yes, and good examples. Thank you.
Okay, good. Yes, and it was very interesting indeed. Okay. So if there are no other questions, I can see no hands raised. I think that we can thank you, Magdalena.